So once upon a time, there were these three guys. Started in a little club in Westborough, Massachusetts. And these were the sound guys at first. There were a few others that were part of the whole gig, but take a look at those guys in a place that you might remember. Hi, I'm Robert, and that's Todd is joining us here tonight from California. Hey, Todd.
How are you, Robert? Awfully good to see you, sir. You haven't changed a bit.
Oh, well, yeah, you need new glasses, dude. So,
Yeah, you know what? You're not wrong.
oh man. So, wow, you've gone from here to there and a lot of stuff in between. Tell me how you wound up in the club in the very first place, because I don't think I know this story.
Well, I was in a band with a guy in Worcester named Bobby Carmen, whose sister was Joanna Connor, who you may or may not remember. She was an incredible blues guitarist, and she's still doing great. And Bobby and Joanna were like, "Oh my God, James Cotton is playing at a club in Westboro. We should go see him." I said, "I know right where that is. Let me go get the tickets." So I walked in one day. It was, I don't know that there was a show that night or whatever, and there was nobody there except you. And I walked in and said, "Hi, I'd like to get some tickets to James Cotton and blah, blah, blah. I can't believe he's playing at a place like this." And we got to chatting. And I told you I was working at a studio and blah, blah, blah. And honestly, I was interning at a recording studio at the time. And you're like, I need a sound guy the day after that show. Would you be interested in coming in and helping us out? And I said, "Oh my God, sure. Why not? That sounds fun. How much?" And so that's how that happened. I literally went to see James Cotton one night, and then the next night, you hosted a show featuring a band called the Swinging Stakes, and I mixed my very first live performance at the Old Vienna Coffeehaus.
Oh man,
And
that
that's how it started.
that is
And they
so
were so good, I thought, I'm good at this. But it really was them. And then, it was the story and Ronnie Earl and Bruce Katz's band and stuff like that. And
Duke Levine and the
Duke,
guys.
Yeah, Duke and Kevin were there all the time, and it was incredible. And that was my first sort of idea of it, without being too hyperbolic. It wasn't just a cool thing. It was literally eye-opening. It was an awakening for me. Like, oh my God, people like this exist, and this is a thing that I could maybe do for a living. Uh, you know,
Well, that living has
and
turned out to be pretty darn good for you, I think. Tell me about the progression. Where did you go when the old Vienna eventually closed up? We'll come back and talk more about the club. But when that place closed up, you went some pretty cool directions. Talk about that.
Well, I think I went from there to doing more live stuff and doing more, the old Vienna got my foot in the door in a lot of places because some of the acts that would come through the club started hiring me to work for them elsewhere. Ronnie Earl, Bruce Katz, Marshall Montgomery, Swingin' Stakes. So I started working at other clubs with those bands, and then those clubs started hiring me to do stuff. And I ended up at places like the House of Blues and Johnny D's and most notably Sculler's Jazz Club. For years and years and years, I worked there and met all of those people. And eventually, working at Sculler's Jazz Club, I met and was hired by a gentleman named Ahmad Jamal, with whom I worked for over 15 years and toured the world and made a bunch of records. And that all really stemmed from that sort of beginning. Every single step in the progression I can trace back to those first couple of days in that club going, what's a DI? And, like I remember distinctly what the gear was. It was a Mackie 1604, a couple of, it was a stereo Alesis graphic EQ, 28 band because 32 is too many, a DBX stereo compressor, and one, I think it was an LXP reverb, and that was it. That's what the club had.
It wasn't
And it
much, but
sounded
it
it
was
sounded
enough to
great,
make
and
you
that's where I
step in.
learned. I learned the less I did, the better it sounded, and that really served me well doing singer-songwritery stuff and jazz. It's an entirely different discipline than rock and roll.
That's
And
fascinating. Your career went a little bit further too. You wound up kind of running your own joint there for a while in Arlington, yeah?
I did. I made the mistake of opening a club and then later opening a theater, and I made the distinct error of putting in stuff I liked, which is it's a death knell, you know. I put in really high-end stuff that I really enjoyed and nobody cared. And turned out you have to do something different to make some money. Uh, but it was, you know, that was a great experience. It also gave me a ton more respect for Tim, for being able to bring in not only high quality talent and also, you know, Fred Taylor over at Scullers, to be able to fill a room with acts of that caliber and still have it be viable was something I never figured out how to do. You know, I
But
made more money with fake Elvis.
you dropped some magic in there because the Regent in Arlington is still doing it, and they're still,
And, and, and
they're
it's great. That's a beautiful venue, and I'm super proud of everything that's happened there and all of the work that they're still doing. You know, the first days it was, you know, we had to do everything like you guys did on a shoestring budget. Everything was made out of bubble gum and duct tape, and we just sort of pasted it together and tried to make it all work.
you've
But
toured
that
with,
was a wonderful experience.
you've toured with, and mixed act some fascinating places. But your career also kind of jumped into television for a while and a very well-known name. Tell us about that.
At the tender young age of 40, it occurred to me it might be time to think about, you know, touring is a young man's game. I wouldn't change a minute of it. You know, touring the world in your 20s and 30s when you're unmarried is just a beautiful, beautiful way to spend those decades. But it's not a great way to get a nest egg. So I had a friend actually who I interned with at the same studio. My very first day as an intern in a recording studio was his first day. There was like 8 of us. And they would do that occasionally. They'd bring in a batch and then whittle it down to a couple. And my friend Dave Winslow and I were that couple.
Cool.
We stuck it out. We stayed there. We were both eventually hired on as assistants and then actual engineers at this studio. And at some point, he went off to find his fame and fortune in New York City and found himself as the monitor engineer on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. And I was still touring at that time, and I would come through the city all the time, and I would see him. Some of my acts would play the show, and I got to know the producers and all those people. And he kept saying, "Dude, you got to get into TV." And I didn't want to live in New York. I was doing just fine. I had all these cool balls in the air. I was all good. And then as I got a little older and older, I thought, well, maybe not. So he calls me one day. And he's like, "Hey, we're taking the show to Los Angeles. It's going to be the Tonight Show, and they're not bringing everybody. I can probably get you in." So I did. I just packed up all my stuff and moved to New York, or moved to Los Angeles at 40 years old, having never worked on television in my life, to start a job on the Tonight Show.
Man, that is so cool. It really is.
Yeah, which was insane. And like every LA story, it evaporated almost as soon as it started. 7 months later, that show was canceled. The Tonight Show should have been bulletproof. But I was in Los Angeles. I knew a lot of people in Los Angeles. So I was able to sort of stick it out until it became the 12-year Conan run on TBS.
Yeah.
And I did that for 12 years, which was an absolute best job I'll ever have as a job. It was just fun. I got to mix music every day, because the house band was exceptional and they were there all the time. My favorite parts of the show were rehearsing the comedy, because it was way funnier than whatever made TV. And the commercial breaks, because it would go to commercial black and the band would play. And I would get 3.5 minutes to mix that band with whoever was sitting in with them. And then would come back, and if I was a good boy and mixed the dialogue well, they'd let me mix the band every day. And so it was fantastic. But here's another Old Vienna connection to that part of the story. When I was working at the Old Vienna, I met someone who would become one of my best friends in the world. His name is Craig McIntyre. He's a drummer. He played with Josh Groban, and he's currently playing with the Goo Goo Dolls, and he's been one of my best friends. We were roommates for years, but I met him at the Old Vienna. He was playing with Shirley Lewis. And he and I were about the same age, early 20s, maybe late teens, but, and he had just become a professional drummer. And like he came in and we just sort of hit it off, and we stayed in touch. Eventually, he became the drummer for Tony Lane Washington Band in Boston, and I was doing a lot of work with them. And every band that he got in, he'd bring me in as a sound guy, and anytime I need any band I was associated with him, I'd bring him in as a drummer. So he had moved to LA 10 or 12 years before I did and had established himself quite well. And part of my rationale for moving there was because he was in LA and the other half of his duplex was just coming up vacant. He's like, dude, if you move here, you can live right next to me in the same house. One of my best friends in the world. It was like the whole universe just opened up to give it to me. But it was because of Craig and my relationship with him, which started sitting at a little cocktail table at the Old Vienna. It's all crazy, man.
Just so cool. And do I understand correctly? Because I haven't had a chance to ask you. You post some pictures of some of the venues that you're playing, but you don't really say where they are. Are you mixing occasionally at the Hollywood Bowl?
I'm not mixing at the Hollywood Bowl, but I've done some work there. I've installed some gear. Some of those pictures are just me at a show, like, hey, look, cool music. But I also know a lot of the mixers that come through, so I'll hang out, in places that look like I'm working. I'm still occasionally mixing music, but mostly, mostly I've become a systems designer at Warner Brothers. So that's what I do now for a living. I design and install and maintain all of the sound gear for every production on the lot on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank, which is
with
an entirely
roots and foundations here in Westboro, Massachusetts.
Oh, it's all great, man. I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it without that step. But like I said, it really was eye-opening when I walked in to that room and heard that kind of stuff. I grew up I grew up in Northborough, right next to Westboro, and the idea of a career in the arts isn't what you grow up thinking. You're a carpenter or a mechanic or a plumber, and nothing wrong with any of those jobs, but that's, the successful people in our towns were the people that owned the garage or the oil company or the auto parts store. Those were the successes. I didn't know any creative, artistic, professional musicians at all until I started working at the Old Vienna. And I was like, oh, these people actually exist in real life, and they're right here. And, and they're just regular schmoes who happen to be exceptional at what they're doing. I kind of want to spend more time with people like this.
Well, the rumor has it that you're going to have a chance to do that, because I'm hearing you just might come out and put your fingers on the mixing board for the show in August here. And that, my friend, is a gift.
Nothing would give me more pleasure. The minute you asked, I was like, oh my God, yeah, I would love to do that. Especially if you guys are picking the acts. One of the things that I've learned over the years is the better the act, the better people think I am at my job. I used to always tell people, look, you don't have to be a good mixer, you just need a good band and stay out of the way. So it would be an absolute joy to do that.